Oh, lovely. Hello YouTube, back with another gaming memories video, and this is to do with the arcades, my story and thoughts and brief history about the arcades. Now, the golden era, arguably, for arcades was the early 80s when they were, had their inception into pop culture. But back then, in 1980, I was only 3 years old, born in 77. And there was no way my folks were going to let me out with my friends to go into some of the dark recesses of town and frequent some of these arcades. That it was just never going to happen. So my glory days of arcades were the 90s, and I guess it just depends on your age, doesn't it, when they were. But starting from the beginning, in the early 80s, I still remember seeing arcade machines and knowing what they were, whether it was from films like Tron or The Last Starfighter and things like that. And I remember the jingles and obviously the music from Space Invaders, and I remember first seeing the Space Invaders cab and that side art graphic. I remember it really did terrify me. I thought it looked really, really intimidating, and it made me feel quite uncomfortable. But again, I was only a little lad. Now, my first experience with an arcade machine was probably when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and in the family house growing up in the 80s. A few doors down, literally, we had a leisure centre, and I would eventually do karate down there, and you would have birthday parties. They had a little salon down there, they had a bar, and you could rent the halls out, and squash court, football courts outside and things like that. But they also had an arcade cab just outside the bar area, and when mum and dad used to go down with us, and they would go down with friends for a few drinks, we would go down, have our Coca-Cola, lemonade or fresh orange juice, which was my drink of choice. And just outside the bar area they had an arcade cab there and a few fruit machines. Dad would go on the fruit machines and I'd borrow a few 10 pieces off him and play the arcade cab there, and that arcade cab was Bomb Jack, and I remember being blown away with this thing, sort of peering up onto it, and I think I might have needed one of the chairs pulled out from the bar and sort of stood on that and with a joystick there and the button smashing those down. But I was just fascinated by this thing, and anyone will tell you back in the day then these things were just magic, cutting edge technology. And I was just blown away by this thing. The idea of controlling what you saw on the screen was just fascinating to me. But anyway, yeah, Bomb Jack, great game. Little character jumping around a single screen on platforms, and the idea was to deactivate all these bombs before they blew up. And then the next cab that I used to play was 1942. And by this time you could see the graphics evolving and things like that by this point. And this was a vertical shooter set in obviously World War II. You had all these different planes and frigates and that you would shoot and bomb, and then the bosses were these bloody great aeroplanes that you would take out, and it was just a fantastic game. I've got vague memories of them maybe having Mortal Kombat down there later on, but I'm sort of jumping ahead of myself a little bit there. And then later on in the 80s, when we were lads, I'd say like 10, 11, 12, something like that, we would go up to a local sports centre, which was also a college for students and foreign students and things like that. And the regular thing would be we would go swimming, come out of swimming, and then go into the student bar, and in there we would play a bit of pool. We would eat some really greasy, smelly chips. But it smelled divine back then. Eat nice and spicy, what they call knick-knack crisps, that was what I remember. And play this arcade cab that they had in there. And that arcade cab was Splat House. And it, compared to obviously all the previous games I played before, it just blew us away. Really gory as well, so we absolutely loved that. And hitting the aliens against the back wall and blood and gloop everywhere. I remember it being really difficult though. We would sink quite a few coins into that, but not get too far. But every week or every other week when we used to go swimming, that was always part of our thing that we would do. And I suppose that just after that, when I was in the 5th year at school, so sort of 15, 16, around that time after school, my mum would let me go in with friends straight into town on a certain day. I think it was, I can't remember when, and we would actually be allowed to go into these arcades, and yeah, we would have to prove our age and things like that. And I think we had a few fake IDs. I can't remember how it worked, or was one of the guys might have been really good, or my mate Tom knew him. I can't remember how we did it, or they were just really lenient and just allowed us to go into a certain area and just play the arcade cabs, or saw the big boys, I don't know, smoke weed and dealt drugs and play pool and did all that sort of nonsense at the back. But that was our first true experience with the arcades, and for me that was my golden era. That was going in there and playing Final Fight, Street Fighter 2, so it was the early 90s, King of Fighters, Turtles in Time, X-Men, the X-Men arcade machine. I absolutely loved that game with Colossus, and the character I always used to be was Nightcrawler, that would just sort of beam around. 4 players, same like Turtles in Time. I had a cab with 4 players around it, and blooming great colourful sprites, fantastic sound, and it was the glory days of Capcom and Konami and SNK, the Neo Geo. Just fantastic days. And obviously around this time it would be argued that with the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo that the home consoles were starting to catch up with these arcade machines. Not quite there as Final Fight Pro for the Super Nintendo, but certainly Street Fighter 2 and Turtles in Time are almost arcade perfect, and it was getting there. And then I'd probably say definitely with a Neo Geo obviously being arcade perfect, although that was a machine that was out of all of our grasp. We'd always flip through magazines and look at the back page. It was usually on the back page or towards the end of the ads, the Neo Geo, and look at the price of it with the games, and it used to be just the dream console for us kids. And I've heard stories from you guys as well that was the case. But for me, the true arcades sort of came at home around the PlayStation era, and definitely the Dreamcast, where things like what have I got here? Soul Calibur for the Dreamcast, for example, that actually surpassed the arcade cab itself with its graphics and animation and things like that. So yeah, and for me, after that, the arcades were always there. We would go into town in our 6th form when we were 18 and things like that, and play some pool and play some more machines. But it probably wasn't for a little while when I went to Australia back in 2005. Being close to Japan, I think they had it. In each city they had Chinatowns. So in Sydney and Melbourne and things like that, they would have Chinatowns. And I stayed there for a year. I had a sandwich year, a year break, career break from work, and stayed with friends and family over there, and I travelled all the way around Australia. It was absolutely fantastic. But in Melbourne, for example, in their little Chinatown, they just had loads of arcades again, and it was brilliant going back into these places. And by then it was your 3D fighters like Tekken 6, 5, what was the one, Raven, the Blade rip-off was introduced. He was in there, and they had all the dancing machines and things like that, the rhythm machines, and it still has some of the old classics in there as well, and obviously the big cars and Daytona and all those sort of things. And yeah, great times. But ever since, really, down here in the southwest, we don't really see arcade machines like that anymore. And I've noticed on a few Facebook groups that there is talks of 1 or 2 arcades possibly starting up. One just over in Cornwall, and one down in Plymouth where I live. A guy's looking to set something up, and it'll just be a place for people to come in and chill out and play some arcade machines and a couple of the consoles, and he's got a shop next door with some retro games in, so we'll see how that takes off. But I think a lot of these things like Revival and Arcade Club, which is obviously way up north for me, that's where I need to get myself. So who knows, maybe next year, and it'd be nice to meet some of you guys. Anyway, that's just my quick thoughts and memories into the arcades. Again, I don't have vast knowledge of the arcades like many of you guys, but again, that's down to us not really going to Butlins and Scagness and all these places where a lot of these machines were held, and it was only until I was a certain age that I could go out and actually play these things. So anyway, yeah, hopefully I won't keep you too much longer. Thanks for watching YouTube. I'll be back quite soon, and yeah, see you later.